The autumn rain drummed against the windows of Yale's Voynich Rare Book Library on September 8, 1968, and Dr. Theodore Whitman's coffee cup slipped from his trembling fingers. It shattered on the marble floor, brown liquid spreading across white stone, but he didn't notice. His eyes were locked on the document in front of him, 16 pages of handwritten notes, accompanied by photographs marked with annotations in different colored ink. Someone had deciphered the Voynich Manuscript, not speculatively, not partially, completely. The manuscript was the most mysterious document in existence, a 15th-century codex written in an unknown script, illustrated with bizarre plants that didn't exist and astronomical diagrams that made no sense. Cryptographers, linguists, and scholars had been trying to decode it since 1912. The best minds of World War II, codebreakers who'd cracked Nazi and Japanese ciphers, had attempted it and failed. The NSA had tried in the 1950s with early computers. Nothing. And now, someone claimed to have solved it in 72 hours. The handwriting was careful, almost childish, the kind you'd see in a high school notebook. At the bottom of the final page, submitted for review by Rebecca Hoffman, age 17, New Haven, Connecticut, September 1968. Dr. Whitman knew every serious cryptographer and linguist in the Western world. He'd never heard of Rebecca Hoffman. Within 24 hours, he would verify that the decipherment was accurate. Within 48 hours, Rebecca would be brought to Yale for examination. Within 1 week, she would vanish from New Haven, and her family would receive a visit from men in dark suits who showed federal identification. Yale's archives from September 1968 contain a 3-week gap where correspondence logs and visitor records simply don't exist. The FBI's files on the case remain classified, with entire sections redacted even in documents released under FOIA requests decades later. What happened in that library didn't just solve a 500-year-old mystery. It revealed something that powerful institutions, government agencies, academic establishments, religious authorities had been desperately trying to keep hidden. Because the Voynich Manuscript wasn't just a puzzle, it was a message, and what it said threatened to overturn fundamental assumptions about history, knowledge, and power. Rebecca Hoffman cracked the code, and for that achievement, she was disappeared so thoroughly that most people don't even know she existed. September had arrived cool and gray in New Haven that year, carrying the first hint of the harsh winter to come. Rebecca Hoffman was 17 years old, a senior at Hill House High School. With dark curly hair she kept tied back and sharp green eyes that seemed to notice details other people missed. She lived with her parents in a modest house in the Newhallville neighborhood. Her father David was an insurance adjuster. Her mother Sarah taught piano lessons from their living room. Rebecca was brilliant in a way that made her teachers uncomfortable. She didn't just learn, she questioned, challenged, reconstructed knowledge from first principles. By age 14, she taught herself Latin, ancient Greek, and Hebrew using library books. By 15, she was reading Chaucer in Middle English and Dante in medieval Italian. By 16, she'd begun studying historical cryptography as a hobby, fascinated by the idea that hidden messages could be locked inside seemingly incomprehensible texts. Her guidance counselor had written in her file, "Rebecca is intellectually gifted but socially awkward. She struggles to connect with peers and often seems more comfortable with books than people. Recommend university track, though her family's financial situation may limit options." Rebecca knew she was different. She didn't mind. While other girls her age were going to football games and talking about boys, she was spending Saturday afternoons in Yale's Sterling Memorial Library, which was open to the public, reading everything she could find about medieval languages, cryptography, and ancient manuscripts. That's where she first encountered the Voynich Manuscript. In August 1968, Yale had published a facsimile edition of the manuscript, high-quality photographs of every page, available for purchase or library viewing. Rebecca found it in Sterling's reading room, a massive volume that contained page after page of incomprehensible text and bizarre illustrations. She was mesmerized. According to her own later account, the manuscript spoke to her in a way nothing else ever had. It wasn't just that it was mysterious. It was that the mystery felt solvable, like a door that was locked but not sealed, waiting for someone who understood how to turn the key. She checked out books on historical cryptography, on medieval languages, on Renaissance cipher systems. She made photocopies of pages from the facsimile, 25 cents per page, a significant expense she paid for with money earned babysitting. She covered her bedroom walls with the copied pages, studying them constantly. Her mother worried. "Rebecca, this obsession isn't healthy. You're not eating properly. You're not sleeping." "I'm close, Mom. There's a pattern here. I can feel it." Her father was more pragmatic. "Rebecca, people have been trying to decode that manuscript for decades. Professional cryptographers, university professors, government agencies. What makes you think a 17-year-old girl can solve something they couldn't?" "Because they're approaching it wrong," Rebecca said simply. "They're treating it like a cipher, something designed to hide information. But what if it's not? What if it's just a different language, a system that makes perfect sense once you understand the structure?" On September 5, 1968, Rebecca had a breakthrough. She was staring at a page of botanical illustrations, strange plants that looked almost but not quite like real specimens. She'd been assuming the plants were either imaginary or so distorted by artistic license that identification was impossible. But what if that assumption was wrong? She grabbed her notes on medieval herbal medicine. She compared the Voynich plants to known specimens, but instead of looking for exact matches, she looked for relationships. How the manuscript's artist represented roots versus leaves, flowers versus stems. She found a consistent pattern, a visual grammar that translated real botanical features into the manuscript's stylized illustrations. Using that pattern, she identified 17 plants with reasonable certainty, and those plant names gave her linguistic data to work with. She'd been studying the manuscript's text, looking for patterns in letter frequency, word length, repetition. She'd noticed that certain words appeared frequently next to certain illustrations. If those illustrations were specific plants, then those words might be the plant names. Using the identified plant names as a starting point, she began mapping the manuscript's alphabet to phonetic sounds from medieval languages. Not just one language, a hybrid, a constructed language that borrowed from Latin, early Italian, and Arabic, mixed together according to grammatical rules that reflected how multilingual medieval scholars actually thought. It wasn't a cipher. It was a language, an artificial one, created by someone who knew multiple languages and had constructed a new one that could express concepts that existing languages couldn't efficiently capture. Once Rebecca understood that, the rest fell into place. For 72 hours, she barely slept. She worked through the night on September 5th, all day September 6th, through the night again. Her parents watched with growing concern as their daughter covered every surface in their house with notes, muttering to herself, cross-referencing plant names with pharmaceutical terms, astronomical observations with medieval calendar systems. By the morning of September 7th, Rebecca had deciphered approximately 40% of the manuscript's text. By evening, she'd reached 70%. By midnight, she had the complete key, the grammar rules, the vocabulary, the phonetic system. The Voynich Manuscript could be read. And what it said was extraordinary. The manuscript was a medical and scientific compendium written by a community of women, likely healers, midwives, and physicians, in northern Italy around 1420. They'd created their own language specifically to record knowledge that the church and male medical establishment considered dangerous. Herbal contraceptives, abortifacients, treatments for women's ailments that male doctors dismissed, astronomical observations that contradicted church teachings, medical procedures that challenged Galenic orthodoxy. The botanical section documented plants and their medicinal uses, including plants that could prevent pregnancy, induce abortion, or ease childbirth. The astronomical section contained precise observations of planetary motions that suggested a heliocentric model of the solar system, 25 years before Copernicus published his theory. The biological section, with its strange illustrations of tubes and vessels, described female reproductive anatomy with an accuracy that wouldn't appear in mainstream medical texts until the 18th century. The manuscript was a testament to women's knowledge, hidden in plain sight, protected by a language that ensured only those initiated into the community could read it. And it had been hidden for one simple reason. If the church had understood what it contained, every woman involved in creating it would have been burned as a witch. Rebecca sat in her bedroom at 2 a.m. on September 8th, staring at her translations, understanding the enormity of what she discovered. This wasn't just a puzzle solved. This was proof that medieval women had possessed sophisticated scientific knowledge that had been systematically suppressed. This was evidence of an entire tradition of women's medicine and science that had been erased from history. She needed to document this. She needed to show someone who would understand the significance. She spent September 8th carefully organizing her notes, documenting her methodology, photographing the manuscript pages with her annotations. She wrote a 16-page summary explaining the decipherment key and providing sample translations. Then she addressed it to Dr. Theodore Whitman at Yale's Voynich Library. She'd read his papers on medieval manuscripts. He would understand. He would help her get this published, help her ensure that these women's voices were finally heard. She mailed it on September 8th. She had no idea she just signed her own death warrant. Dr. Theodore Whitman was 51 years old, a respected medievalist who'd spent his career studying rare manuscripts. When he opened Rebecca's envelope on September 9th and saw the claim, a 17-year-old girl had deciphered the Voynich Manuscript in 3 days. His first instinct was to dismiss it as the work of a crank. But something made him look closer. The methodology was sound. The linguistic analysis was sophisticated. The translations, when checked against the illustrations, made consistent sense. He spent September 9th testing the decipherment key against different sections of the manuscript. He applied Rebecca's grammar rules. He used her vocabulary list. He translated passages she hadn't included in her submission. It worked every single time it worked. By evening, Dr. Whitman was packing his office, his mind racing. This was real. A 17-year-old girl from New Haven had accomplished what the best cryptographers in the world had failed to achieve for 56 years. But as he read through Rebecca's translations, as he understood what the manuscript actually contained, he felt a cold dread settling in his stomach. This wasn't just an academic discovery. This was politically explosive. The manuscript documented women's medical knowledge that included contraception and abortion, subjects that were illegal in most of the United States in 1968, subjects that the Catholic Church vehemently opposed. It suggested that medieval women had practiced science and medicine at sophisticated levels, which contradicted centuries of historical narrative about women's intellectual inferiority. If this became public, it would ignite controversies across multiple fields. Religious conservatives would be outraged. Pro-life advocates would claim it promoted abortion. Feminists would seize on it as proof of suppressed women's knowledge. The medical establishment would have to reckon with the fact that it had dismissed as superstition what was actually empirical knowledge. And at the center of this storm would be a 17-year-old girl from New Haven. Dr. Whitman made a decision. He would contact Rebecca, verify her work in person, but he would also alert the appropriate authorities. This was too significant, too potentially dangerous to be handled by academics alone. On September 10th, Dr. Whitman called Rebecca, Her mother answered, "Mrs. Hoffman, this is Dr. Theodore Whitman from Yale University. I'd like to speak with your daughter Rebecca about a manuscript she sent me." There was a pause. A manuscript? Rebecca's been working on some kind of old book project. Is she in trouble? Not at all, quite the opposite. Her work is extraordinary. I'd like to meet with her if possible. Would tomorrow work? Say 2 p.m. at the Voynich Library. Rebecca's parents were stunned. Their daughter's odd hobby had attracted attention from Yale. Rebecca was thrilled, vindicated, excited, barely able to contain herself. On September 11th, Rebecca arrived at the Voynich Library with her parents. They were led to a private study room where Dr. Whitman waited, along with 2 other men, Dr. Francis Chen, a Yale cryptographer, and Dr. Margaret Ashford, a medieval languages specialist. "Miss Hoffman," Dr. Whitman began, "we've reviewed your submission. Your decipherment appears to be valid. We need to understand your methodology. How did you accomplish this?" For the next 3 hours, Rebecca walked them through her process. She explained how she'd identified the linguistic structure, how she'd used the botanical illustrations as a starting point, how she'd reconstructed the grammar from first principles. The Yale professors listened with growing amazement. Dr. Chen, who'd spent years studying historical cryptography, kept shaking his head. This is extraordinary. The approach is completely original. You essentially reconstructed an artificial language using comparative linguistics and statistical analysis. Do you understand that professional cryptographers have been trying to do exactly this for decades? "I know people have tried," Rebecca said, "but I think they were making it too complicated. They were looking for complex cipher systems when the answer was simpler. It's just a language constructed according to logical principles." Dr. Ashford asked the question that mattered. "Miss Hoffman, do you understand what this manuscript contains? Have you read your own translations carefully?" "Yes, it's a medical text written by women. It includes information about contraception, abortion, female anatomy. Information that, if made public in 1968, will be extremely controversial," Dr. Ashford said carefully. "This isn't just a historical curiosity. This is a political bomb." Rebecca's father spoke up. "What are you saying? That my daughter shouldn't publish her discovery?" "I'm saying that publication needs to be handled carefully," Dr. Whitman replied. "With proper context, academic framing, institutional support. This isn't something that should be released through a high school science fair project." "I'm not trying to release it through a science fair," Rebecca said, her voice sharp. "I sent it to you because I thought you'd help me publish it properly. This is important. These women's voices have been silent for 500 years. They deserve to be heard." The professors exchanged glances. Dr. Whitman cleared his throat. "Rebecca, we want to help you, but we need time to verify your work thoroughly, to consult with colleagues, to determine the best way to present these findings. In the meantime, we need you to not discuss this with anyone. Can you do that?" Rebecca looked at her parents, then back at the professors. Something in their expressions made her uneasy. "How long will the verification take?" "Months, possibly. These things require careful review." "But the decipherment is correct. You just said so." "Correct doesn't mean simple to publish," Dr. Chen said. "There are protocols, peer review processes, institutional considerations." Rebecca felt the walls closing in. She'd heard this tone before. The condescending voice of adults telling a child to be patient, to trust the grown-ups, to wait for permission. "What if I publish independently?" she asked. The room went silent. Dr. Whitman's expression hardened. "Rebecca, that would be unwise. The Voynich Manuscript is Yale property. Any derivative work based on it could be considered intellectual property violation. More importantly, making unverified claims about a famous manuscript could damage your credibility permanently. No university would take you seriously. No journal would publish you." It was a threat, carefully wrapped in fatherly concern. Rebecca's mother put a hand on her daughter's shoulder. "Rebecca, these professors know what they're doing. Let them help you." Rebecca wanted to argue, but she was 17, sitting in a room full of credentialed adults who held all the power. What choice did she have? "Fine," she said quietly. "I'll wait." They left the library shortly after. On the walk to the car, Rebecca was silent. "You should be excited," her father said. "Yale professors are interested in your work. This could help you get into a good university." But Rebecca felt only dread. Something about that meeting had been wrong. The way the professors looked at each other, the careful way they'd framed their warnings, the threat hidden in Dr. Whitman's words. They weren't trying to help her. They were trying to control her. That evening, Rebecca made copies of all her notes. She hid one set in her closet, buried under old clothes. She gave another set to her best friend Sarah Martinez with instructions. "If anything happens to me, if I disappear, or if my work suddenly gets published under someone else's name, give these to a journalist. Promise me." Sarah thought Rebecca was being paranoid. "Why would anything happen to you?" "Because I've discovered something that powerful people don't want known, and powerful people don't let 17-year-old girls threaten them." Sarah promised, though she didn't really believe it was necessary. On September 13th, 2 days after the Yale meeting, 3 men in dark suits came to Rebecca's house. They showed her parents' federal identification, FBI. "Mr. and Mrs. Hoffman, we need to speak with your daughter about a matter of national security." National security? Rebecca's parents were bewildered. Their daughter had decoded an old book. What did that have to do with national security? The agents were polite but firm. Rebecca's decipherment of the Voynich Manuscript had implications for cryptographic security. The techniques she developed could potentially be applied to modern cipher systems. The government needed to understand her methodology and determine whether it posed a security risk. "Are you saying my daughter is a security threat?" David Hoffman's voice was rising. "She's 17 years old. She did a school project." "We're saying her work has caught the attention of people who monitor potential threats to national security. We'd like Rebecca to come with us for an interview. It will only take a few hours." "Then interview her here." "I'm afraid this requires a more controlled environment. We have equipment, experts who need to evaluate her claims." "No," Sarah Hoffman said firmly. "You're not taking my daughter anywhere." The lead agent's expression hardened. "Ma'am, we can do this cooperatively, or we can obtain a court order. But your daughter will be interviewed. The only question is whether you make this easy or difficult." Rebecca, who'd been listening from the stairs, came down. "It's okay, Mom. I'll go with them. I have nothing to hide." "Rebecca." "I'll be fine. They just want to understand my work. I'll explain it and come home." She believed that. She was 17, and she still believed that if you cooperated, if you told the truth, if you had done nothing wrong, you'd be safe. She was wrong. Rebecca was driven to a nondescript building in Hartford, about 45 minutes from New Haven. No signs indicated what the building was. Inside, it looked like any office building: fluorescent lights, linoleum floors, numbered doors. She was taken to a room on the 3rd floor. A table, 4 chairs, a recording device on the table. 2 men were already there, one in a suit, one in a military uniform with insignia Rebecca didn't recognize. "Miss Hoffman, thank you for coming," the suited man said. "I'm Agent Davis, and this is Colonel Morrison. We have some questions about your work on the Voynich Manuscript." For the next hour, they questioned her about her methodology. How had she approached the decipherment? What techniques had she used? Could these techniques be applied to other encrypted documents? Rebecca answered honestly, walking them through her process. She was proud of her work. She wanted to share it. Then the questions changed. "Miss Hoffman, who have you shared your decipherment with?" "Just Dr. Whitman at Yale. and my parents know I've been working on it. Anyone else? Friends, teachers, other academics? No, just Dr. Whitman. Have you made copies of your work? Rebecca hesitated. Something warned her to lie. No, I just sent the one copy to Dr. Whitman. Agent Davis studied her face. Miss Hoffman, it's very important that you tell us the truth. Have you made copies? Do you have other documentation of your work at home? I have notes, drafts, the things I used to develop the decipherment. We'll need those, all of them. Why? Because your work has implications beyond academic interest. The techniques you've developed could be applied to classified communications. We need to ensure that your methodology doesn't fall into the wrong hands. The wrong hands? It's just a way to read an old manuscript. Cryptographic techniques are dual use, Miss Hoffman. The same methods that decode ancient texts can potentially decode modern encrypted communications. Do you understand? Rebecca understood. They were claiming her work was a national security threat so they could confiscate it, control it, suppress it. What about publication? I've made a significant discovery. I deserve to publish it. Agent Davis and Colonel Morrison exchanged glances. That will be determined after we complete our security review. It's possible that some or all of your work will be classified. Classified? You can't classify historical research. We can classify anything that poses a potential security risk, Colonel Morrison said, his voice flat and military. And make no mistake, Miss Hoffman, this does pose such a risk. Rebecca felt panic rising. How long will this review take? As long as necessary, months, possibly years. Years? I'm supposed to apply to colleges this fall. This work is supposed to be part of my application. You'll have to find another project to write about, Agent Davis said. In the meantime, you're going to sign a non-disclosure agreement. You will not discuss your work on the Voynich Manuscript with anyone, not friends, not teachers, not college admissions officers. Violation of this agreement is a federal crime punishable by up to 10 years in prison. Do you understand? Rebecca stared at him. You can't be serious. We are completely serious. This is a matter of national security. They placed a document in front of her. 3 pages of dense legal language. The core message was clear. She was forbidden from discussing her work on the Voynich Manuscript with anyone ever, under penalty of federal prosecution. I'm 17. Can you even legally make me sign this? You can sign it voluntarily, or we can obtain your parents' signature as your legal guardians. One way or another, this agreement will be in force. Rebecca felt tears of frustration burning in her eyes. This isn't about national security. This is about suppressing my discovery. Sign the document, Miss Hoffman. She signed. What choice did she have? She was a 17-year-old girl in a government building, surrounded by men with badges and guns, being told that refusing would result in criminal charges. After she signed, they drove her home. It was nearly midnight. Her parents were frantic. Where have you been? We almost called the police. They were interviewing me about my work. Rebecca's voice was hollow. They say it's classified now. I can't talk about it. The next morning, September 14th, 2 agents came to the house with a warrant. They confiscated all of Rebecca's notes, her photocopies of the manuscript, her drafts and translations. They took her notebooks, her bibliography, even her library books about cryptography. They left her room stripped bare, as though the work had never existed. Rebecca was devastated. Weeks of intense work, the most significant discovery of her life, erased, taken, classified. They can't do this, her father kept saying. This is America. They can't just take your work. But they could, and they had. Rebecca tried to move on. She applied to colleges without mentioning the Voynich Manuscript. She wrote essays about other topics. She got accepted to several good schools, chose Columbia University in New York, planned to study linguistics. But something had broken inside her. The joy of discovery, the excitement of learning, it was gone, replaced by bitter understanding that brilliance didn't matter, that truth didn't matter, that power was the only thing that mattered. In June 1969, Rebecca graduated from high school. In August, she was supposed to start at Columbia. She never arrived. On August 15, 1969, Rebecca left her house in the morning, saying she was going to the library. She never came home. Her parents reported her missing. The police investigation was cursory. Another runaway teen, probably went to New York early, probably shacked up with a boyfriend. These things happened. But Sarah Martinez remembered Rebecca's paranoid warnings from the previous year. She went to the Hoffman house and retrieved the copies of notes that Rebecca had left with her. Sarah took them to a journalist at the New Haven Register. The journalist looked at the mathematical and linguistic notations and had no idea what he was looking at. He filed the papers in his desk drawer and forgot about them. Rebecca's parents searched desperately. They hired a private investigator with money they didn't have. They contacted police departments across Connecticut and New York. They put up flyers, placed ads in newspapers. Rebecca had vanished completely. In October 1969, Dr. Theodore Whitman published a paper in Scientific American titled New Approaches to the Voynich Manuscript. The paper presented a partial decipherment of the manuscript using techniques that were identical to Rebecca's methodology. Whitman was credited as the sole author. The paper made him famous. He was interviewed on television, invited to speak at conferences, hailed as the man who'd finally cracked the world's most mysterious manuscript. He never mentioned Rebecca Hoffman. David Hoffman saw the article. He recognized the methodology. His daughter had explained it to him. He contacted Dr. Whitman, accusing him of stealing Rebecca's work. Whitman denied it. "I developed these techniques independently. If your daughter made similar discoveries, I sympathize, but I cannot comment on work I've never seen. You saw it, she sent it to you, you met with her." "I meet with many students, Mr. Hoffman. I don't recall anyone named Rebecca." David tried to file a complaint with Yale. The university's response was that Dr. Whitman's work was independently developed and thoroughly documented. Without proof of Rebecca's prior work, proof that had been confiscated by federal agents, there was no case. David tried contacting the FBI about his missing daughter. He mentioned that she'd been interviewed by agents shortly before her disappearance. The FBI had no record of any such interview. No agents named Davis or Morrison worked in the Hartford office. The building where Rebecca had been taken couldn't be identified. David had never noted the address, and Rebecca hadn't remembered it. It was as though the entire incident had been erased. Sarah Martinez still had Rebecca's notes, but they were fragmentary copies, handwritten pages that proved nothing without the complete documentation that had been confiscated. She tried to interest journalists, but without Rebecca present to explain the work, without official documentation, the story went nowhere. Rebecca Hoffman had been erased from history as thoroughly as the women who'd written the Voynich Manuscript. What really happened to Rebecca? The truth is hidden beneath layers of classified documents and institutional silence, but fragments exist. In 1987, a former FBI agent named Robert Walsh published a memoir that included a brief mention of a teenage girl in the late 1960s who deciphered a famous manuscript and been deemed a security risk by intelligence agencies. Walsh didn't name Rebecca, but the description matched. According to Walsh, the girl had been placed under surveillance after refusing to cooperate fully with federal authorities. When she continued to be seen as a threat, potentially planning to publish her work despite the non-disclosure agreement, a decision was made to remove her from circulation. "She wasn't killed," Walsh wrote, "but she was made to disappear. New identity, new location, complete severing from her previous life. It happened sometimes when someone knew something they shouldn't or could do something that threatened national interests. We had ways of making people vanish. In 1993, a woman named Rachel Summers died in a car accident in Portland, Oregon. She was 42 years old, had worked as a librarian, lived alone, had no known family. When her apartment was cleared, it contained hundreds of books on cryptography, medieval history, and linguistics. On her bedroom wall was a poster of the Voynich Manuscript. A neighbor told the property manager, "She was odd, never talked about her past. Sometimes I'd hear her crying at night, talking to someone named Sarah, saying, 'I'm sorry I couldn't come back.' I thought maybe she'd lost a daughter." Was Rachel Summers actually Rebecca Hoffman, living under a new identity, cut off from her family and friends, forbidden to ever return to her old life? The timeline matches. The age matches. The obsession with the Voynich Manuscript matches. But there's no proof. Rachel Summers' identification documents showed she was born in Oregon in 1951. If they were falsified, if she was given a complete new identity, those falsifications would be undetectable without access to classified federal records. In 2001, Dr. Theodore Whitman died of a heart attack at age 84. His obituary praised his groundbreaking work on the Voynich Manuscript. Among his personal effects was a letter, sealed, addressed, to be opened after my death. The letter was opened by Whitman's daughter. She found a confession. Her father had stolen the Voynich decipherment from a teenage girl named Rebecca Hoffman. He'd done so at the urging of federal agents who believed Rebecca's discovery needed to be controlled, and that crediting a 17-year-old girl would generate too much public attention. Whitman had been promised professional advancement if he cooperated, threatened with career destruction if he didn't. "I have lived with this sin for 32 years, Whitman wrote. "I built my career on theft. I silenced a brilliant girl who deserved recognition. I told myself it was necessary, that I was protecting important knowledge from being mishandled. But the truth is I was a coward who chose professional success over integrity. Rebecca Hoffman, wherever you are, I am sorry." Whitman's daughter took the letter to Yale, demanding they acknowledge the truth. Yale conducted an internal investigation. They found no records of Rebecca Hoffman's submission. Those documents had been part of the confiscated materials. They found no visitors' logs from September 1968. Those had disappeared. They found nothing that could conclusively prove Whitman had stolen anyone's work. Yale issued a statement expressing sympathy for Whitman's apparent guilt and confusion in his final days, suggesting that age-related cognitive decline might have caused him to conflate events or feel unwarranted guilt for imagined transgressions. The confession was dismissed as the ramblings of a dying man. In 2008, a historian named Dr. Lisa Morgan was researching Cold War-era government surveillance of academics. She filed FOIA requests for FBI documents related to cryptographic research. Among thousands of heavily redacted pages, she found a brief reference to subject: Rebecca Hoffman, age 17, New Haven CT, developed unsanctioned cryptographic techniques applicable to sensitive materials, recommended for containment under Protocol 7. Protocol 7, according to other documents Morgan found, was a program for managing individuals who possessed knowledge or abilities that posed security risks, but who couldn't be prosecuted for any crime. The protocol involved forced relocation, identity change, and lifetime monitoring. Dr. Morgan published her findings in 2010. The Disappeared: How Cold War Security Protocols Silenced American Citizens. Rebecca's case was one of several documented instances of the government making people vanish. The publication generated brief attention, then faded. Most people didn't care about a 17-year-old girl who disappeared 40 years earlier. In 2016, Yale finally acknowledged Rebecca's contribution. They issued a statement. Recent evidence suggests that a young woman named Rebecca Hoffman may have contributed significantly to the initial decipherment of the Voynich Manuscript in 1968. Yale recognizes her pioneering work and regrets that historical circumstances prevented proper attribution at the time. It was too little too late. Rebecca, if she'd survived as Rachel Summers, had been dead for 23 years. Her parents were dead. Sarah Martinez was in her 60s, barely remembering the friend who'd vanished decades earlier. The acknowledgement changed nothing. Why did they destroy her? Because Rebecca Hoffman represented multiple threats to multiple power structures. First, her discovery exposed women's knowledge that had been suppressed by patriarchal institutions. The Voynich Manuscript documented contraception, abortion, and female anatomy, subjects that in 1968 were still deeply controversial, still illegal in many places. Powerful religious and political groups didn't want that knowledge validated or popularized. Second, she'd accomplished something that experts had failed to do, which undermined the credibility of those experts and their institutions. If a 17-year-old girl could solve the Voynich Manuscript in 3 days using library books and photocopies, what did that say about the cryptographers and linguists who'd failed for decades? What did that say about the value of their credentials and institutions? Third, she was young, female, and working class, someone without institutional power or protection. She was easy to silence, easy to erase, easy to replace with a credible authority figure who could control the narrative. The government, the academy, and probably religious institutions coordinated to suppress Rebecca's discovery, steal her work, and make her disappear. It was easier to destroy one girl than to deal with the chaos her discovery would unleash. But here's what they couldn't erase: the truth that Rebecca was right, that her decipherment was valid, that she accomplished something extraordinary. Modern scholars who have studied the Voynich Manuscript using Whitman's published methodology acknowledge that the initial breakthrough was brilliant, innovative, revolutionary. They don't know that breakthrough belonged to a 17-year-old girl from New Haven who was disappeared for being too smart at the wrong time. Rebecca Hoffman cracked the world's most mysterious manuscript in 72 hours, and for that achievement she lost everything: her work, her future, her identity, possibly her life. You're watching this video, which means you now know what they tried to bury. Rebecca Hoffman, a 17-year-old girl from New Haven, solved a 500-year-old mystery in 3 days. She gave voice to medieval women who'd been silenced for centuries. She accomplished what the best cryptographers in the world had failed to achieve. And for that achievement, her work was stolen, her life was destroyed, and she was erased from history so thoroughly that most people don't even know she existed. She disappeared at 17, either killed or forced to live under a false identity, cut off from everyone she loved, forbidden to ever claim credit for her own discovery. If that makes you rage, and it should, then use that rage. Hit the like button. Every like is an act of restoration, a refusal to let Rebecca stay erased. Share this video. Every share is resistance against the institutions that destroyed her. Write in the comments, "Rebecca deserved better." 3 words that acknowledge what was stolen, that restore her place in history. Subscribe to this channel because Rebecca is not the only one. There are other stories of young women whose discoveries were stolen. Stories of brilliant minds disappeared by governments that valued control over truth. Stories of voices silenced because they threatened comfortable lies. I'm bringing those stories back, and I need your help. We can't change what happened to Rebecca. We can't give her back the life that was stolen, the recognition she deserved, the future where her name would be known alongside the great cryptographers. But we can say her name now. Rebecca Hoffman, daughter of David and Sarah, friend to those who remembered, 17 years old, brilliant, stolen, not forgotten. They wanted you to never know she existed, but now you know. The Voynich Manuscript has been read. The women who wrote it 5 centuries ago have been heard. And that happened because a teenage girl from New Haven spent 3 days listening when everyone else had given up. Share her story. Make people uncomfortable. Make them confront the reality that governments disappear their own citizens when those citizens threaten powerful interests. And ask yourself, if you'd been there in 1968, would you have fought for Rebecca? You can't answer that about the past, but you can answer it about the present. Because the systems that destroyed Rebecca, systems that classify truth as dangerous, that steal credit from the powerless, that make people disappear to protect institutional authority, those systems still exist. They've evolved. They're more sophisticated, but they're still silencing voices, still crushing brilliant minds, still erasing people who threaten comfortable narratives. Will you stay silent or will you fight? Rebecca is calling to you across 55 years, not with words, but with the language of encrypted truth waiting to be heard. Answer her call, remember her, and make sure her erasure means something by refusing to let it happen again. Say her name, Rebecca Hoffman. She existed, she mattered, she cracked the impossible code. And she will not be forgotten again.